if you said, Sailor, if you can get all this done in a year, are you going to do it? And I think he would say, yes, I will do it all in a year. I will do 42 billion in a year.
Today's episode is brought to you by Akash Network, the world's premier decentralized compute marketplace. Check out Akash to buy and sell computing resources securely and efficiently. Purpose-built for public utility at akash.network. Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of Coinage. I'm your host, Zach Guzman, coming to you live from our Brooklyn studio here in New York City, as we are joined once again with Bitcoin hovering around that $100,000 mark with Travis Kling, friend of the show. Travis Kling, founder of Ikigai Asset Management. Travis, good to see you, man.
Beautiful day to be a crypto investor, Zach. Beautiful, beautiful day.
I feel like each day we've had you on for the last few months, things have gotten better and better. So it's gotten more beautiful and more beautiful. And now here we are finally at 100K. And yet still somehow seems like it's not that beautiful of a time for some people. It's almost like people can't believe where we're at right now. And as we always do, I just kind of want to start with your thoughts on this rally, because we broke 100K, we dipped back down below, a little bit of a washout in terms of altcoins right now. I mean, how do you look at where we're at in this cycle and what you make of maybe a lack thereof, perhaps, of the celebration across crypto?
Well, I think if you take crypto Twitter as the litmus test, I think the general rule at this point is that there's not that many people on crypto Twitter that own that much Bitcoin. So when Bitcoin runs really hard, that doesn't get most of crypto Twitter that jazzed up, because Bitcoin is like the boomer crypto asset at this point. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily true for me, and not true for everybody, but certainly true for some. I think this 100K mark, it always was my base case that we were going to chop this range for a while. And it's not like it's been that long either. I mean, we just broke it, about 10 days ago, right? So, absent getting real kind of steam rolling behind the Bitcoin strategic reserve, which I don't think is going to happen between now and the inauguration. Mm-hmm. I mean, it would make sense to me that we would chop this 100K range, because I just think that it's just this big round number. I'm sure there's a lot of super OG Bitcoiners that just, this is their level to sell. In fact, there's been some proof of that. I don't know if you've seen some of the on-chain metric stuff. It shows the age of coins when last moved, or like the long-term holder, short-term holder ratio. All this is based on just days, cumulative days since the last time a Bitcoin has moved. But the way the chart looks is there's just been a big spike of old coins moving just very recently since the election, and that's basically who's selling to Sailor and who's selling to all these ETF buys and whoever else has been buying, of which there's obviously been a lot. So I think you just have a lot of churn at this 100K level, and absent a Bitcoin strategic reserve getting more traction, I can imagine us chopping this range for another I don't know. I could imagine it lasting for a while. Yeah, let me see this.
This is just the data you're talking to in terms of the percentage of longer term holders, now down from 60% earlier this year, below 50% in terms of people who have held for 7 years or longer. Data from Glassnode, pretty interesting chart, I think, when you're looking at all that. But I mean, I guess that's kind of, maybe Travis, that's kind of to my earlier point, which is like there's this level of anxiety in crypto, and perhaps, again, no surprise as to why that may be when it comes to everything that you have lived through, that I've lived through, that everybody in crypto has lived through, right? And we talk about this every time you're on, it becomes a therapy session. But what's weird is really kind of like the break between Bitcoin and obviously kind of, we're going to get into what's going on with MicroStrategy and the buys coming from Bitcoin miners in a second. But outside of Bitcoin, like you said, there are other tokens, and I'm thinking about XRP as kind of one of those. You were tweeting a little bit about kind of I don't know if you're talking about zombie coins in relation to XRP specifically. We could get spicy here in terms of your take on some of these altcoins, but Stellar, XRP, Cardano, maybe not the coins that we would have expected to be leading, but some of these are up like 300% over the last month. I was looking at the numbers. It's pretty insane. I mean, what do you make of those moves? What do you make of maybe some of these legacy coins popping off? What does that say about some of the froth?
Yeah, these Dino coins seem. If I was going to try and characterize the price moves here, it would be some combination of, let's see here, people coming back from last cycle that haven't been in crypto in a long time, people coming back to crypto and buying what they know, rumors of an ETF, rumors like, other cryptos getting an ETF, rumors of this ISO certification, something or other that's going to like drive the way that the US government regulates crypto. And if you're like ISO certified, that you're going to have some kind of preferential treatment. Don't think there's much or any substance to that, but it's something I've heard. The rumor that US based crypto token projects would not have their capital gains taxed. Let's see here. Some of the founders of certain Dino coins, specifically Ripple and Cardano, their founders being involved in the Trump administration's regulation of crypto. Let's see here. That's 5 things. Do I have anything else? I think there's one other one too. Maybe it'll come to me in a second. But so I think there's just a combination of a bunch of different factors that drove these names. Oh yeah, just XRP is like pretty liquid, but a
Yep.
lot of these other names are quite illiquid. And so when you see these moves in like Hedera and EOS and some of these other names, I don't think Cardano's all that liquid either. I think you were just looking at probably very thin order books combined with, my guess is there were some people that were short these names. They are pretty common shorts for people that look to pair trade. And I think that maybe you could have had some short squeeze type of stuff going on as well too. So I think it
Yeah.
was an amalgamation of all those things.
Well, I mean, I guess, as traders look at all this, I mean, is there a takeaway in terms of those names being the first out of the gate, maybe because of that short activity, but then kind of who you expect to lead if it is the case that Bitcoin's kind of resurgence is to continue? I mean, when you look at the dominance chart too, it's been kind of amazing in terms of how quickly that has really dropped off. Bouncing back a little bit today, again, with the sell-off of altcoins, some of the names that we just mentioned. But, I mean, it seems like that was almost too swift. So when you look at things, Travis, I mean, what's kind of your best estimation if, okay, a lot of that could have been short covering there in the buyback for some of these Dino coins, if you want to call them that. But, like, how do you look to what you've seen in this first half of the back cycle? Like, how should people be playing that, you think?
Well, this is definitely not a financial advice, and I'm wrong often. I think about Bitcoin and I think about everything else. And Bitcoin, the major driver for this cycle is going to be whether or not we get a Bitcoin strategic reserve, and that just is going to give you a very different price target with or without that. And so, trying to get a sense of the likelihood that you think that happens, and over what time frame does that happen or not happen, and what is the path of new information that becomes available where the market changes its likelihood of a BSR actually happening. So you kind of take some view on how much of a Bitcoin strategic reserve you think is priced in right now,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't think there's much in there right now in Bitcoin price right now. And so then it's like, oh, what are the kind of steps where new information becomes available, where the market starts to ratchet up its assigned probability of a Bitcoin strategic reserve happening? I think that is the kind of main headline thing for Bitcoin. There's other positive stuff going on as well too that I think can and will drive prices higher. but I think it's just such a different, you know, if the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve happened, my price target would not start with a two, right? Like, I mean, it just, you're talking about, I mean, in my view, you are talking about $300,000 plus Bitcoin if something like that were to happen, because I think it would spark a sovereign bidding war. And if you don't have something like that, then to me, I think we're in the high hundreds, mid to high kind of hundreds is the way that I'm thinking about it. So then with everything else, there's a lot of people looking for an ETH catch-up trade. That one's very straightforward, although it does seem to lack any kind of fundamental foundation to it. It's like people think that ETH BTC is poised to outperform. Yeah, there you go. With $1 million of volume. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
And that's just in the first 100 days is kind of what Polymarket has here in terms of 27%
right.
chance. It's been interesting to see that kind of bounce around. I think the ETH catch-up trade has definitely performed quite a bit since we had you on last time too, thinking about whether or not that would eventually flip. I think we're gonna have Sean Farrell on the show tomorrow, just digging into, he basically rotated and added Ethereum into their strategic portfolio. I think he's calling a huge breakout for that breakout to continue.
Yep.
I don't know if you're in the same camp, but it does seem like that ETH BTC, which looked absolutely dead just a month ago, no longer the case, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're going to, unfortunately, I have not heard a convincing case about something around ETH's technical roadmap or around new project launches on the main chain that is like would drive a re-rating of ETH BTC or, Sol ETH or, pick your L1 du jour versus ETH.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that. It's really been more stuff around, it's underperformed really bad, or, the ETH ETF inflows are picking up, or, we're going to get big regulatory changes, and ETH is going to be the major beneficiary of a new de facto regulatory framework in the United States and a much more just supportive regulatory backdrop in the United States. ETH is, going to be, the ETH ecosystem is going to be a big beneficiary of that, and those are all fair. But those are kind of external catalysts, right? That's sort of like the world around ETH changing, as opposed to things actually happening, with the ecosystem or with the protocol or that kind of deal. So it would be great if you could also kind of get some stuff internal to ETH to get folks excited. I haven't seen that yet. Definitely on the lookout for that. If anybody is aware of some stuff like that, send me a DM or drop
We'll
in the
see,
chat.
man. I mean, like, as you know, we are Coinage is getting to the end of the year. Our patronage dividend is shaping up nicely as we have our NFT holders becoming legit DAO co-owners. It's been fun to see those trickle in, as has been the case as we opened that up just a couple weeks ago. So I'm hoping personally that contributes to a surge in terms of mints and legit ownership in the NFT space. We've seen a little bit. We were just chatting with Doodle's CEO. Julian came on the show a little bit ago. We've seen a little bit of a bounce back in terms of legacy Ethereum NFTs. That's been interesting. But I do want to get your takes because it does seem almost as if none of that matters when you've got Michael Saylor buying up billions of dollars of Bitcoin week to week. And now, as we were talking before we jumped on, that you have Bitcoin miners also copying the same Michael Saylor MicroStrategy playbook to scoop up Bitcoin when they already have exposure to Bitcoin by being Bitcoin miners. So, Travis, I think it's a fair question to ask in terms of, it's something that we dug into. We've got like a 7-minute piece digging into this idea of MicroStrategy potentially creating a little bit of a Bitcoin bubble here. Some people are extremely scared. Others say, look, man, the stock price might go down, but we're not going to have anything near to what the blow up looked like with 3 Arrows Capital and some of the shenanigans that went down with Grayscale back in the day. But how do you look at that? How nervous is Travis Kling? What's your expectation for maybe if we surge up higher, how much more room we got to run off that?
Yeah, just so the capital markets are very open for Michael Saylor right now, both issuing common equity and doing these converts. And it's allowed him, and the stock is trading at a tremendous premium to its Bitcoin NAV. And there's kind of a confluence of factors, I think, that is driving that. There is as you can probably imagine, the implied volatility on MicroStrategy options are this is stunningly high. This is one of the, like, not exaggerating, one of the juiciest. I mean, it may be like if you plot like liquidity of the options market on one axis and implied volatility on another axis, MicroStrategy options, I think, maybe are like in a place, up by themselves, basically. And that has drawn a lot of interest, a lot of capital flows, market makers making markets to all kinds of different takers, different types of market participants. Wall Street Bets is now they're super fired up about MicroStrategy options. There's this Yield Max ETF. I don't know if you know what this thing is, MSTY. There's this thing that sells a bunch of MicroStrategy options and holds a bunch of cash to like cover the outcome of the options that they sell, but it generates this like unbelievable yield off of all of because the implied volatility is so high. This thing has like a 200 and something percent yield year to date. That's the yield on this thing. So it's like, and it's got, I don't know, $1.5 billion or 2 billion AUM. So there's a lot of these factors swirling around MicroStrategy that has allowed Saylor to do what he has continued to do. I think I wrote it in my monthly highlights. Oh no, I wrote it in my monthly letter. I mean, I think he bought $12 billion of Bitcoin in November, and then he's done another, I don't know, 3 or 4 billion month to date or something like that. So it's crazy. That's crazy numbers. And I think what I would say is
still, by the way, it's still just kind of like beginning, because they announced the plans, $42 billion in terms of debt and equity offerings over the next 3 years. So it's like, as crazy as those numbers are, it's not even, I guess, if that's it, right? If those are everything, it's not even halfway through.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if Saylor were sitting right here, he would say, if because he introduced this like Bitcoin yield per share metric that he created, right? And it now appears that this is his absolute main driver for this company, is can he, through capital markets, figure out how to increase the amount of Bitcoin per share when you normalize for the entire capital structure. You got to convert all the converts and that sort of thing. But after you go through all those conversions, can you do that? And that's what he's focused on. And because the stock trades at such a premium to NAV, that's open for him. He continues to do that. He said he wanted to do 21 million of equity and 21 billion of equity, 21 billion of fixed income over the next 3 years. But I think if he was sitting here and if you said, Saylor, if you can get all this done in a year, are you going to do it? And I think he would say, yes, I will do it all in a year. I will do 42 billion in a year if the market will take that, right? And so as long as that's open for him, I really don't have a view on how long that ARB can stay open. I don't know if I'd call it an ARB, how long that opportunity will be made available to him.
Yeah.
And what the factors would need to be that would close the capital markets for him. I mean, it feels like it would be some sort of meaningful macro risk off, perhaps a rates spook where inflation picks up, Fed's got to go on pause, then Powell starts talking about hiking rates instead of cutting rates, kind of put a big macro top in for risk assets for some period, multi-month or a few quarter kind of period of time. And maybe that just, now he can't do that anymore. But just because his premium to NAV goes away, or just because the capital markets close to him, does not mean that MicroStrategy's capital structure is about to collapse and he's going to be a forced seller of even a single dollar of Bitcoin.
Yeah,
and that has to do, right. So that has to do with the default, the details around what causes a default in these convertible debt instruments,
Yeah.
which is my understanding that there's just essentially no default risk there. And it seems like there's parts of crypto Twitter that are kind of missing that because it's down in the weeds of how convertible debt work, which,
Yeah, yeah.
crypto
No,
folks
it's
don't
a
know
very
about.
good point. I mean, like that's essentially what's happening here. And it's again, it's these are bets. I think it's worth stressing that these are bets being made by some very large insurers, or in the case of Allianz, Germany's largest insurer. I mean, these are not unsophisticated traders, so they know what they're doing. And so buying debt like that and having convert into MicroStrategy shares, like you said, it's a very big difference. Also worth pointing out that the man's sitting on $15 billion in paper profits. So like, there's also that when it comes to forced selling, as you mentioned, Travis. I think those are important things to consider here as well. So definitely don't want to sit here in this share and kind of, link things to what's going on or what went on in the past with some of these other completely unlevered or completely undetached from reality levered bets, which is very different than what's going on with MicroStrategy. But I think all of that is very fair. I do want to shift to one other topic, though, that you've been watching, which I think is pretty interesting when it comes to all the pressure on the next part of this trade in terms of the U.S. adding Bitcoin to a strategic reserve. Let's not forget that there are other countries that have moved way quicker than the U.S. In doing so, one being El Salvador, and their bet also tracked, very similar to Sailor Tracker. Naive down in El Salvador, the president over there, up still more than $100 million on his bet since he began buying Bitcoin. And it was interesting, they also had a massive gold discovery that you were tweeting about, and also announced a deal with the IMF when it comes to maybe backing off of this idea of forcing vendors in the country to accept Bitcoin as legal tender as part of that new deal. Just kind of curious to get Travis Kling's take on how some of these bets on Bitcoin, relationships with Latin American countries on Bitcoin, how those are changing as we move forward. What's your take?
Yeah, I think making the payments deal optional instead of mandatory down there in order to get because it's my understanding what he's doing is going to the IMF and asking for a loan to start mining the 50 million ounces of gold that were just discovered. That's my understanding of what's going on here. And he, I guess, is part, the IMF is, I think, now quite obviously not a fan of what he was doing with Bitcoin, the experiment that he was running, having Bitcoin as legal tender in El Salvador, so made him back off the mandatory and make it optional. It's my understanding people aren't really paying for stuff much down in El Salvador with Bitcoin down in El Salvador anyway. So it's really, I think my understanding is not that big of a deal that they're changing the parameters to that. But I do think it's interesting that I had this tweet that kind of went viral yesterday. I was kind of poking fun at Peter Schiff a little bit because, I mean, it's also true for the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve because, Cynthia Lummis's idea is for the U.S. government to sell gold to buy Bitcoin, which, is going to give Peter Schiff a heart attack if he's not careful. And then now on like a smaller scale, it's like El Salvador looks like they're doing something similar. They found all this gold. Bukele is very obviously probably going to try and mine the gold as quickly as possible and take those profits and sell the gold to buy Bitcoin with. And then there was somebody in the comments there was saying, why not just sell all the rights to the gold right now, like to a gold mining company, get all the cash up front, and then just plow it into Bitcoin? I thought that was kind of interesting as well too. But as I was thinking about that more, he probably wants the jobs in the industry. I assume mining 50 million ounces of gold creates a ton of jobs for El Salvador, and add some economic stability from an industry perspective. So I don't know, we'll see, but that's a real number. 131 billion at current prices. That's a very real number. And
no, that's a lot more. That's a lot more than the profits he made buying Bitcoin and holding it up until now. So I mean, yeah, that is a lot of money, and it does change things. But I guess it does also, to your point on a U.S. reserve triggering a race for other sovereigns to also stack up their own Bitcoin reserves. I think that that is kind of an interesting thing to explore, particularly given kind of, I guess, what we've seen through those conversations with the IMF, because Argentina, right now, I think the largest debtor of the IMF is also going through a pretty big strategic kind of pivot of its own, shall we say, with Milei down there. And a man who has definitely gotten close with Elon Musk, definitely gotten close with Donald Trump. Almost seems like maybe potentially if the IMF is so anti-Bitcoin shenanigans that maybe could throw some cold water on the idea of the maybe next country to copy the Bitcoin playbook. We already saw Germany dump their Bitcoin holdings earlier this year. I mean, I guess what is the idea of, let's just say worst case scenario that Trump can't get it done, that a Bitcoin strategic reserve here doesn't happen? What's kind of like the emergency parachute to pull in that narrative? And is it potentially marginally bearish if maybe Argentina is inching backwards? And again, speculation on my part, connecting those dots.
No, I think it's a good perspective to look at it through, because I think Argentina probably would have been near the top of people's lists for other countries most likely to enact something like that. And it's a difference between sovereigns buying Bitcoin and sovereigns creating like a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Because I think it's like, if Putin decides to buy a bunch of Bitcoin, it's not like there's going to be some bill that's introduced and then they're going to legislate about it, right? He just takes a big pile of money that's hidden somewhere and buys a bunch of Bitcoin, probably already done it. Russia, sovereign money that he's in control of, probably already owns a huge pile of Bitcoin. Same with the CCP, same with the Middle East, right? The Middle East doesn't pass some bill to buy a bunch of Bitcoin. They just buy a bunch of Bitcoin, which I think they've probably already done and have been doing for quite some time. I don't think there's been so much rumor around that, and it's known that they have a lot of mining that goes on there. So there, it's the difference between like a sovereign deciding to buy a bunch of Bitcoin versus doing this kind of big public dog and pony. Oh, we're going to have some edict issued from a president, or we're going to do some legislation that gets passed or whatever. So, but I think Argentina probably is close to the top of the list for other countries that would be looking to do something like that and do it in decent size. I haven't been paying enough attention specifically to what Milei's been saying to have a sense of the likelihood of that. I feel like when he first got put into power, people thought that there was a high likelihood of that, but then it got walked back pretty quickly, and I haven't heard a lot since then. But I think it's one other angle is just it's maybe interesting to see what this Trump administration is going to do as it relates to the IMF in general, because I think what we do know is the Trump administration, a lot of these different kind of global groups, Trump's general view is that they don't pull their weight relative to what the United States does, and that would be rejiggerings of power, or there's just going to be potentially extinguishment of some of these groups in some cases, right? And I think the IMF certainly at least has the potential to be one of those. So that would be interesting to see what.
Yeah, I don't know how all of that changes. And again, nobody really does, because I guess it hasn't even begun yet. And, we'll see what happens once we kick things off in January in the new administration. Certainly, I think there's going to be a lot to cover, a lot of fireworks, and already looks to be pretty interesting. I know you were also tweeting about Mr. Sachs coming in as crypto czar, and the idea, or sorry, as crypto, and I think he's also covering AI, right? Is the idea of like kind of
AI and crypto czar. Yep.
And so, I mean, I think, it's something that you and I chatted about a little bit last time it came on, this idea of those worlds merging. And obviously, we talked to you about GOAT and these AI kind of enabled tokens. I mean, as you look at that space, there have been some pretty interesting advancements in, I guess, AI agents and the idea of crypto and AI merging. I mean, what are you looking towards and seeing there? Like, what are the big questions you have in your mind for it to go from just being like a GOAT meme coin trading to, oh shit, these shits are actually doing some things now that are quite intriguing?
Yeah, let me say one thing about David Sachs, and then we'll get to AI agents. So two things. One thing, it is much more bullish that it's an AI crypto czar that assumedly is running like an AI and crypto council, or some kind of like just tech council in general. It's way more bullish that crypto got lumped in than it is to just have a standalone crypto czar running a standalone crypto council.
Mm-hmm.
For this clown ass industry to get lumped into the most transformative technology potentially in human history, that's very bullish. Because AI is just a lot more serious of a thing than what we got going on here. Our like $3 trillion market cap notwithstanding. So that is very bullish. I love that. Lends us a lot of credibility, regardless of the merit of that.
Yeah.
And with David Sachs, he's on the All In podcast, very public voice, talks all the time. My assumption, I don't know this for sure. Maybe he's not going to be able to be on the All In podcast anymore. My guess is he will continue to be on the All In podcast. And so you're just going to have a level of communication and transparency and openness around AI and crypto at the governmental level, unlike anything we've ever seen. I don't think you've ever seen anything like that before, right?
Yeah.
Like imagine if Janet Yellen was like running a weekly podcast for the last 4 years about what the Treasury's up to or whatever, right? So that's like, I just think that people maybe are not understanding how bullish. I think that's very bullish, because I think that just means there's going to be a ton of conversation about crypto at the absolute highest level that's going to be happening publicly. I think that's a very, very bullish thing. So that's what I'd say about Sachs. And then on the AI agent stuff, it's very early. I continue to be very interested in it. Continue to spend a lot of time looking at it. There's been a fair amount of project dilution that's going on. People are just launching a tremendous amount of these things. I think I saw last week that the Virtuals protocol, which is this AI agent kind of launching protocol built on Base, Coinbase's Base. Yep. And I think I saw at the peak last week, there was 1,100 agents that were launched in a single day on Virtuals. So that like gives you a sense of the like just dilution of new projects that are coming out here. And it's still nascent. I think there's still very little differentiation amongst the agents about what their capabilities are. But it's definitely not going away anytime soon. It looks to me like it's going to be kind of a headline bright spot for the crypto ecosystem right now. It's certainly much more interesting to sort of dig into than just about anything else in crypto right now. And part of that is just because all of crypto is so uninteresting. Like there's just like, tell me what interesting shit is happening in crypto right now. Seriously, like just point me to interesting things that are happening in crypto right now. So this is interesting.
Yeah.
And TBD on how legitimate these teams are and what they build out, what they're able to accomplish. We still haven't had. I think one of the things I mentioned the last time I was on about it that was so interesting to me was that you have these AI agents, and then now they have a meme coin associated with them, and so now there's like economic resources that are available to this LLM, and then the question is now what? Like now what does the AI agent go do with these newfound economic resources? Yeah. And since the last time I came on here, we actually haven't had much of an update of like, what are they going to do with these newfound economic resources? So that still remains to be seen. And to me, that still continues to be the sort of really compelling part about all this is this now what with the economic resources. So
yeah. Kind of the next chapter of what they do once they have it. And I guess everyone's eyes got pretty big when they realized, oh, wow, that's a lot of money for an AI agent to play around with, but nothing really came of it. And I think we're all sitting around waiting for it to happen. Us too, and certainly at Coinage here. It's been interesting to watch some of those other kind of IP related AI agents. We've talked about Do Queen, this kind of like Do Kwon enabled AI agent that was created in his image, and what could potentially happen with that. It's all been weird. I would agree with you, though. There's not a lot of interesting things happening in crypto, which is why, I don't know, I find what we're doing here interesting and curious to see kind of how the market reacts as we continue to grow Coinage. But Travis, to wrap up here, I guess the last question, obviously, as we look at maybe more in the short term, it's anyone's guess in terms of where we go. As you mentioned, the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is going to be top of mind for kind of where we land in 2025. But I guess best opportunity for you, maybe some things that people are missing outside of what's intriguing in crypto, just straight up where the opportunity that looks most overlooked for you right now to wrap up. What's top of mind for you in that?
Overlooked. The best way I can answer that is just to go back to what we just talked about, which is like, I'm sure people that are going to watch this spend X number of hours a week looking at crypto. I don't know what that number is. For some people, it's an hour. For some people, it's 5 hours. For some people, it's 50 hours. If you're not spending, I think it's probably a misallocation of time to not be spending a decent amount of your weekly allotted crypto time on what's going on in this AI agent space.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's insanely risky. Like, it's like unbelievably risky, right? I mean, you can really lose every single dollar you put in there really quickly for no reason in a moment. You really can lose everything. So it's very, very risky.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not necessarily even telling people to put money into any of this. I'm not. But at least spending time looking at it and scrolling through Twitter with the different tickers, like just look up some of the tickers of these names and then start looking and seeing what people are talking about. These guys are doing Twitter spaces you can listen to. They're doing podcasts that you can listen to. Some of these founders, go listen to them, listen to what they're talking about. You can get into the Discord if you want to go into that level of detail, and see what folks are talking about in there. And I just think that's really good kind of allocation of your time and sort of risk reward what is worthwhile for me to be spending my time on in crypto. I do think this AI agent space is that. So
yeah, I don't know. For me, I've been looking into kind of like the idea of cheering on deregulation in crypto and what that could mean, particularly as kind of the last chapter exists under Gary Gensler and coming out of it. I don't know if you saw, but Celsius's Alex Mashinsky basically pleading guilty to 2 charges of fraud. That's basically the last case, I think, that was kind of in that kind of shuffle of the last cycle that you and I both came out of. BlockFi, those founders, not involved in all of that. But I was curious if you kind of saw that, because the maximum sentence for him, 30 years, I doubt he gets that. We won't know until January, but it's basically the last domino to fall. And I don't know what that number is going to be. I don't know if you care. But it is interesting to think about early on in the Trump administration. We're looking at potentially, there was that huge ruling around Tornado Cash, TBD on what happens for the Tornado Cash founder in that case, but presumably big boost for him when it comes to freedom and the idea of that protocol no longer being allowed to be, at least in the judge's initial ruling, can't be put on the sanctions list, which I think is pretty interesting. And then the idea of how many years Mashinsky gets, if any, after pleading guilty to what happened at Celsius. And so, there's going to be pardons. Ross Ulbricht, Silk Road, that'll happen, presumably early on in the Trump administration. And then you've got everyone rethinking what happened with FTX and SBF. And I just don't know what all of this will look like in terms of when you basically open the floodgate and say, look, what's going to be legal under a Trump administration? Mm-hmm. And what should crypto be celebrating when it comes to all of that deregulation? Because when you have no rules, we saw what could happen. And I don't know if there's any takeaways for you on that, but I think it's going to be a travesty if Mashinsky walks with no time. I'm just going to say that because he lied to me himself on Yahoo Finance, and that was bad news bears. And I don't like when people lie to me, Travis.
Yeah, I do not think he's going to have zero time. I'd be shocked if that were the case. I don't know where I'd set the over-under on how much time he's going to get, but I don't know. Maybe it's a decade or something. Maybe that's where I'd put the over-under. So I hear what you're saying about kind of coming to a close on a lot of the last cycle stuff. That's certainly a good, healthy, positive thing. Hopefully we've got some lessons that we've taken away from it. I don't see any of the risks. To my knowledge, uncollateralized lending currently is essentially non-existent. Under and uncollateralized lending is essentially non-existent. So, as long as it stays essentially non-existent, that removes a significant risk that caused a lot of the damage that we happened last cycle. A lot of the characters, the cast of characters that were at the top of the food chain last cycle that saw the downfall, a lot of those folks have been, either removed from the space entirely or seen their prominence in the space significantly diminished. That's certainly a positive thing. Justin Sun is the one that hangs out there, right? This is kind of the unkillable cockroach billionaire, so to speak. And I've just always operated on the assumption that he has some coverage from the Chinese Communist Party that allows him to operate in a way that other people just would have gotten popped at this point. I don't know what's going on with him, but there's a lot of smoke around that. And maybe at some point that's going to kind of come to fruition. But I think that still remains a major risk. We are kind of moving the FTX bankruptcy. They still haven't gotten their money back, but that's going to be happening. A lot of that's going to happen in spring of next year. So I think that will be sort of a pseudo closed chapter for a lot of people. Although I think a lot of people have sold their claim and moved on. The claim market, moved up into the kind of 130 cents on the dollar type of thing. And I think a lot of people just sold their claim and moved on. So, I hear your point about potentially being nervous about if you have sort of no regulation, does that open the door for an increased likelihood of some of these risks that happened last cycle or prior cycles come to fruition again. But I think that's not what my base case would be, because what you had is just totally ineffective regulation from the SEC. Like it was like Gary Gensler allowed all of those things to happen and then sued the entities after the fact, which is just like this hilariously ineffective approach to these sorts of things. So I think we'll be able to have, through de facto regulation and just, I think maybe this AI and Crypto Council having sort of eyes, and I don't know what FinCEN is going to end up, the OCC, these types of different pockets that will be touching crypto. I just think you're going to have a lot more effective eyes, oversight on these types of things that will be able to prevent, just like prevent things like Celsius from happening. Yeah, it's just like amazing that it's like you had this adversarial SEC while still allowing Mashinsky and Sam and these types of things to happen. And I think that's just not what's going to happen this go around.
Yeah, it was incredibly ineffective when you really look at it, and that's the idea.
That's right.
I mean, everyone in crypto is like, oh, thank God they really protected me from all that, because it didn't happen that way, and it can't be any worse. So I guess we'll see. We'll see what happens in the next one. I think everyone's on the same page in terms of just wanting to flip the page, and we are a mere few days left away from doing that. And it'll be an exciting wrap up to the year. And obviously, we'll crown a crypto project of the year as we always do at Coinage, and we will move on. And there will be a whole new year ahead of us. But Travis, can't thank you enough for coming on, man. What's up?
Yeah, there's a lot to be excited about going into 25.
I think so. So there may not be a lot that has, you excited, and nothing on your radar that's terribly exciting. But I think once we turn the page, we'll get to we'll get to a new era of that excitement coming back again. But Travis, as always, man, can't thank you enough. I think this probably is the last time we have you on the show. So happy New Year to you, and we'll see you in 2025, man.
You too, sir. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. That'll do it for Travis, for myself, for everybody here at Coinage. As always, you can catch the biggest headlines in Web3 at coinage.media. I'm Zach Guzman, saying so long from our studio here in Brooklyn.